The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Caroline Williams from Benefit Advisors Network, here to welcome you to our webinar. Today, we'll hear from Andrea Dunn, Michelle Filler, and Bobby Kloss, who will cover the topic of HCM trends, catalyst to conversation, diversity, and inclusion. Before we begin, we are required by law to advise you that this webinar is being recorded. If you do not wish to participate in a recorded event, please disconnect yourself from this call. Today's presentation includes a white paper and a slide deck, both of which can be downloaded from the handouts section of the GoToWebinar software on your screen. Since this meeting is being viewed by hundreds of people across the U.S., all callers are on mute. Please post your questions in the chat feature and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. If we do run out of time, we will come up with an FAQ white sheet that we'll distribute to you next week. Participation in today's live webinar is eligible for continuing education credit through HRCI, SHRM, and SEEBS. Activity codes will be sent by the agency who invited you to the webinar after verifying attendance. With all of that said, I'll hand this off to Bobby to begin today's discussion. Bobby, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you everybody for joining us today. As Caroline shared, our presenters today are myself. I am the Human Resource Director for Human Capital Management Services with Benefit Advisors Network. Andrea Dunn is our agency administrator. Andrea also sits on Alera Group's Diversity and Inclusion Council, as well as does Michelle Filler, who is Director of Client Services. And Michelle is a benefit advisor expert with more than 30 years experience, with also sitting on Human Capital Management and the Holistic Wellbeing Committee. Today's agenda, we want to be talking about setting the workplace stage and then being able to recognize, remove biases in your workplace. So what does it look like from a human capital management standpoint and strategy, and then connecting to and supporting your community. So learning who your community is and how do you connect and support with diversity and inclusion throughout those different demographics. So first, Caroline, if you could scroll forward, please. In setting the workplace stage, I think it's important that we look at workforce dynamics. And workforce dynamics are all those things that are happening outside of our place of employment, but they do very much disrupt the continuity of business. I mean, right now, everybody knows that COVID is, one of those workside dynamics. But in context of conversation for today, we have things such as the Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matters. We look at the disparate impact of COVID across those demographics. And then most recently, we've also had the court ruling of Bostock versus Clayton County as it affects the LGBTQ community. So these are those workside dynamics that actually come from the outside into our workplace and, like I said, disrupt the continuity of business. They give a catalyst for conversation. And these are all strategies that human capital management representatives need to be able to look at, identify, and have a plan to move forward within that. So Caroline, if you could, thank you. So the first thing that we want to do is kind of give some context around what is diversity and inclusion. Diversity, it's pretty self-explanatory. As far as we know this, it's the traits and characteristics that make people unique. Age old, I mean, we talk about, one age versus another age. We talk about male versus female, a specific race versus another race, religion versus another religion, national origin versus another national origin. So, I mean, as age old as people are, diversity is equal to that. What is a little bit different in this conversation, if you could go back though, just a moment, Caroline, is inclusion. Inclusion is about having a work environment where all individuals are treated fairly and respectfully. Many employers are focused in on, let me check those boxes that I have all my, diversity demographics within my workforce, but there is that opportunity then to take and make sure that not only from a diversity standpoint, but from an every employee standpoint, that they feel like they are a valuable part of the workplace and that they have equal access to opportunities and resources that move the business objectives forward. So, okay, if you could go forward. So from a human capital management standpoint, it's about how does each individual contribute to the organization's success, and what does HR do, or where is their place in making sure that this happens? So it's about understanding the business objectives, the goals, the mission, the vision, from an overall strategy down through those departments, which human capital management is one of those departments that need people, technology, resources, just as every other department in the organization. Where human capital management really comes into play, though, is it's about having the ability to attract and retain people, having that strategy across all functions of HR. That should always be the main focus, the main philosophy of HR, is being able to attract, retain people that is going to lead to the success of that specific business. If you could go forward. So when we're talking about discrimination, it is about policies, but it's also about the commitment to the policies. So if we look back again, against those policies that are out there, which human resources is responsible for disseminating and ensuring that the policies are followed, we start with Title VII. So we all know, or should know, that Title VII and related laws are out there that were created, that they give an equal employment opportunity to all applicants or employees, regardless of their diverse demographic, and that it is illegal to discriminate against a person who comes from one of these demographics, or if they file a charge of discrimination or participate in an investigation or lawsuit. And we can see that just over the last 5 years, there seems to be a decrease in the charges that are being filed through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission related to discrimination, but we still see that those are still very high charges. And that we have a tendency also to fluctuate in those. If you could go forward. So the goal of the EEOC is to make sure that any victim of discrimination is made whole. And there could also be additional liability charges besides making an employee whole if there's discrimination found to be intentional. So companies could be assessed based upon their size, punitive compensatory charges, and these damages, like I said, can vary depending upon the size of the employer. So again, HR's job is not only to put a policy out there, but to ensure that the company liability is being mitigated by enforcing those policies. If you could, please. So the other thing that I don't think a lot of times that people think about when they think about the liabilities that are there for them as an employer is the loss of the organization's brand. So when we think about attracting and retaining employees, it's very important that the company's brand or their reputation is always at a high status, because that's what's going to help attract employees to us. It's going to attract our customers to us, and it's going to help us also be able to kind of mitigate those high turnover costs that we have. It's going to help mitigate any medical claims. So we can have a long-term return on what our investments look like, from workers' compensation, from medical claims, from an inability to recruit qualified candidates. Those costs are all subjective but objective costs that are there from the loss of an organizational's brand. So Caroline, please. So what is HR's job? It's to stop that bleed. We need to attack those root causes. We want to be able not only to retain employees, but especially in today's environment, which is extremely difficult. We've got high turnover with the millennials. We have high turnover in the Generation Zs that are coming up. We're losing the baby boomers. I'm sorry, I can't believe I forgot my own demographic. We're losing baby boomers who are retiring. So we have to find ways to stop that bleed, and it all centers around company culture. If you could go forward. Thank you. So it's about commitment to these policies. Like I said, it's not just about putting it out there, but from the C-suite on down, employees have to be committed to ensuring that there is an equal employment opportunity policy. But then for culture-based purposes, there's also a policy that's created and committed to for diversity and inclusion. So what does that look like on both sides of the coin? Number one, that everyone will have an equal opportunity dependent upon what their demographic is. But then they also have this opportunity to participate and contribute to the success, to the growth, to the long-term viability of the employer. And that's throughout everything that is done in business and in the business practices. If you could please go forward. So why is it important, and how does the commitment to policies kind of show itself within the culture, or the benefits of that for having this positive culture? So we've talked about the ability to attract and retain, but we also need to talk about the employee engagement. We know that if employees are engaged, then we can meet business goals. We're going to get improved productivity. We're going to impact our health and welfare. We're going to impact our workers' comp claims. We're going to get an increased performance because employees are happy to be there. They want to be there. And they're going to be more engaged, or more present in what they're doing and how they're doing it. And when that happens, we then can improve our production. We can improve our customer continuity because we have the same workforce. We're not consistently turning over employees and having to retrain them on who our customers are and what their needs are. We can also increase our institutional memory. So, for example, if policies are created, we know why we do what we do. Procedures, again, why we do what we do. Kind of know where the bodies are buried, what worked, what didn't work, what we tried, what was successful and what we tried. So you get that institutional memory with long-term employees. And then, again, we're going to limit our recruiting, our onboarding, our training costs, because we're not having this constant turnover, and we can be more productive in other areas. So the first thing that we need to kind of take a look at is, where does an organization sit today? Um, and it's about understanding or recognizing that, if we're going to attract and retain employees, it's because we see them as the most valuable asset. It's also about really being committed that our goal is to always attract quality employees and retain these quality employees, and that the C-suite is committed to that practice, and that it goes through the whole culture and all areas of a business. So you want to take stock everywhere of what are your current practices today. And it's really looking at it from a more factual type of basis than a very subjective basis. So you're going to be looking at your demographics, your hiring, your promotions, your pay practices, your applicant pools, your turnover costs. You need to see how those things are being affected in order to move forward on improvements. And so these two are areas that a lot of times I'll get questions for HR. How do I move that we have a need to the C-suite? How do I tell my manager? How do I talk to my CFO? Well, these demographics are going to be the baseline or the key for having those very integral conversations that now you can say, okay, this is why we need to move our culture forward, why we need to look at how do we really define diversity and inclusion within our client base. Caroline, if you could go forward one more. And so also, again, looking at our policies and our practices, looking at some of our performance-based issues. Do we have a certain group, a certain manager who has some trends in their department, whether it be for turnover or write-ups? Again, what policies are in place today for diversity and inclusion, and how are those successes measured? So Caroline referenced that we have a white paper available also in the download, and it really goes through these details and a lot more discussion. Today our webinar is hopefully to present a very high level assessment of what is needed, and then the white paper, which is called Band 639, also can be used to really start to hone in and dig into these policies and practices. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrea. So we've talked about, what we need to do to break through the walls of establishing diversity and inclusion within our organization. But we need to know what is the underlying to helping us break through the walls, to establish a culture that is a positive culture that does support diversity and inclusion. And so Andrea is going to talk about recognizing and removing biases to help establish those practices. So Andrea?
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Caroline, can you go to the next slide? I just want to start with a definition of bias, just a blank definition. Bias is defined as prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. Next slide, please. Bias can be explosive in the life of the targeted audience. The undercurrent of what is hidden beneath the surface of bias can erupt in multiple ways, causing very harmful effects to the direct target group, their families, their communities. It is far-reaching and leaves deep grooves and wounds that never heal and continue to fester throughout the years. Economically, bias can also affect the growth of prosperity of industries and organizations, whether small or large. When companies fail to include diversity in their structure, they are excluding a very large and powerful asset from within their communities. These diverse groups provide creative ideas and opportunities to reach untapped markets, which they represent, and can effectively communicate the services your firm provides. Having this advantage can change the dynamics and profit margin of many firms. Remember, diversity is not something that should be on your to-do list as something to fulfill. As the latest trends develop, it should become a welcome and celebrated part of your organization. Bias, prejudice, and racism is not just a social or political matter. It is a human matter of human concern that affects human beings, and it is a climate that only humans can change. There are two types of bias: explicit bias and implicit bias. Explicit bias is direct, intentional bias. The person is aware of their behavior, their prejudice, and their attitudes. This type of bias requires a person to acknowledge how they feel and react towards others. Explicit bias usually appears when we feel threatened. However, implicit bias is known as the hidden bias. They are considered social perceptions and intuitions that influence our understanding, actions, decisions, and attitudes. They are also known to reinforce stereotypes in the unconscious. It is triggered involuntarily and without the awareness of the person holding the bias. It is unfortunate, but studies have shown that we all have hidden biases lodged deep within. These biases target race, ethnic background, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. Next slide, please. Implicit bias has a few noteworthy characteristics. They are pervasive. No one is immune. Implicit and explicit biases are related, yet they have distinct mental constructs. They can both exist at the same time and reinforce each other. Implicit bias does not necessarily align with our morals, viewpoints, or declared beliefs. Although studies show that we generally tend to hold implicit biases that favor our personal in-group, we can also have them against our in-groups. Implicit biases are malleable and can change over time. They can be unlearned, however, very slowly. Next slide, please. Why it matters. Implicit bias may be harder for employers to identify. They instantaneously benefit certain groups while disadvantaging others. Subtle implicit biases can have an impact on how people are chosen for jobs or elevated to higher positions or properly and fairly trained in the positions they currently hold. They can be present in multiple aspects of the business, which can negatively affect diversity inclusion in numerous ways. Next slide. The next two slides highlight some of the most prevalent forms of implicit bias found in the workplace. I will share five of these. Affinity bias, also known as similarity bias. It reflects the tendency people have to connect with others who share similar interests, experience, and backgrounds. This can present in the workplace during the hiring phase. Usually firms that hire for culture fit are operating under this bias. Affinity bias should not disqualify a candidate, but should not be the deciding factor either. Moving forward, firms should focus on qualities that would be an addition to the team. Seek out culture adds versus culture fits. Next is confirmation bias. This is when we draw conclusions about a person or situation based on our personal desires, beliefs, and prejudice rather than unbiased merit. This bias usually shows up in the beginning of the hiring process, from reviewing a resume and forming an opinion based on irrelevant qualities such as names and addresses. Conformity bias has been known to generate questions during the interview process that conforms the hiring manager's bias. Employers should stick with standardized skills-based questions that provide equal and fair opportunity. Next is attribution bias. This is when we judge a person's behavior based on prior interactions or observations due to previous encounters with the person. Attribution bias can cause hiring managers and recruiters to declare a candidate unfit for the job because of something unusual on their resume or unexpected behavior during the interview. Rather than assume a candidate is unfit for a job, remember to ask clarifying questions. Something misperceived can be clarified. Next slide, please. Next, we have conformity bias. This is when you act like or conform to those around you, regardless of your personal beliefs. This is harmful in the workplace because judgments and assumptions can arise against those that are different. Create an environment that people are free to be themselves. Do not assume anything. And lastly is the halo effect bias. This is when we place people on a pedestal. This can appear at any stage in the hiring process. Hiring managers may become blinded by an individual's status or by a former position they may have held in a high-ranking firm without having the needed qualifications to fill the current position. To prevent this, consider skills and experiences as it compares to other candidates. Next slide, please. I have two research studies I would like to talk about. One is on race in the labor market. The next is on gender bias in the sympathy orchestra. The first one is on race in the labor market, which will be followed by gender bias in the symphony orchestra. A study of race in the labor market revealed that applicants with white-sounding names receive 50% more interview callbacks than those with African-American names. This study revealed that employers were more responsive to Anglo-Saxon names, even if resumes with African-American names has the exact same or even higher credentials than their white counterparts. This racial gap was uniform across occupation, industry, and employer size. Next, a gender bias study was performed to help female musicians earn positions in the orchestra. During the 70s and 80s, women were only 5% of the orchestra body. As a way to combat this issue, researchers Golden and Rouse performed a study to test for gender bias. The researchers used a screen during the auditions to hide the person's gender while they played. As a result of this, women had a 50% chance of advancing from the preliminary round. This study created change in the hiring practices of the orchestra, as well as created an increase to 25 to 45% of women hires. Next slide, please. To move forward, a question to ask in moving forward. Does implicit bias exist in your workplace? One place to look at is employer and employee behavior. Although most people are good and have great intentions, unconscious implicit bias may exist and need to be revealed in order for change to take place. To help with examining personal bias, if you are interested, you can take the IDT test offered at Harvard University. This test reveals whether people have a bias towards members of specific groups Over 20 million people have taken this test since 1998, and it has revealed hidden biases, such as 80% of test takers had a negative bias against the elderly, and 75% of both whites and Asians have a positive implicit bias towards whites in comparison to Blacks. Next slide, please. To continue moving forward and create permanent, impactful changes, organizations will need to use and create new methods of selecting, hiring, promoting, and embracing diversity and inclusion. Firms will need to promote and design teams that include diverse thought, ideas, and people. As people of different experiences and backgrounds bring different viewpoints and creative ideas, companies should offer customized implicit bias education. Bias education training is not a one-size-fits-all scenario. Firms must understand that separate operational areas have distinct cultures, needs, requirements, and varied levels of client contact. Therefore, training should be as diverse as the communities within the organization. Programs should be designed to fit the need. Open discussions with employees, as well as surveys and other data gathering information, can help reveal implicit bias. To begin moving forward with changing the workplace dynamics, firms are encouraged to provide positive images of the non-dominant groups and support and provide activities for shared experiences. Next slide, please. The more we know people for who they are, the less we will treat them as what they are. I thought that was a very important statement by Cook and Ross. Next slide, please. Pause is a tool. This tool can be used when you are uncomfortable or you're facing a situation with someone that's a part of your out group. Your in group is considered individuals that are like yourself, maybe white, maybe Black, maybe male, maybe female. Anything other than what you consider to be yourself will be considered your out group. So PAUSE is a 5-step, easily doable program. We'll start with P. Pay attention to what is happening beneath your judgments and assessments. When we pause and look at what is happening, we then have an opportunity to discern between an event and our interpretation of that event. Acknowledge. Acknowledge your reactions, interpretations, and judgments. Doing this creates opportunity to recognize your interpretation as just that, an interpretation. As soon as you notice an interpretation as the interpretation, you have shifted to a higher level of awareness. Next is understanding. Understand the other possible reactions, interpretations, and judgments that are possible. Sometimes when we meet someone, they may behave differently from what we consider to be the social norm. They may use methods or react in ways that are foreign to us. There may be very valid reasons. A few to consider are cultural differences, nervousness, or they may be facing a personal challenge that you are not aware of. Before misjudging, consider all possibilities. Search for constructive, empowering, or productive ways to deal with situations. Ask yourself some questions like, should I make my assumption based on my initial reaction, or should I pause and get to know them a little better before I make my decision? Then move on to execute. That's moving forward with your action plan after you've made a complete and thorough assessment and have drawn a fair conclusion of your interaction. It is important to reshape your diversity topic from only discrimination and protected classes to focus on equal treatment, respect, and sound judgment. In doing so, organizations can begin to analyze, identify, and challenge hidden biases in every aspect of the employment life cycle. This is my final slide, slide 28. This is a pledge. We have a placard card on it on the white page, and I'm just going to read it. It's from the CEO Action of Diversity and Inclusion Pledge. I pledge to check my bias, speak up for others, and show up for all. I will check my own biases and take meaningful action to understand and mitigate them. I will initiate meaningful, complex, and sometimes difficult conversations with my friends and colleagues. I will ask myself, do my actions and words reflect the value of inclusion? I will move outside of my comfort zone to learn about the experiences and perspectives of others. I will share my insights related to what I have learned. Thank you very much, and I will turn it over to Michelle.
Thank you, Andrea. Okay, we're going to take a little time now to talk about connecting to the community. So we've already recapped some of the issues that are facing employers today. We've identified what bias is and looked at some of those aspects, and we've actually evaluated ourselves in the process too. So now what? Now what do we do with that? Because we all know that knowledge without use is useless. So let's talk about how to connect to the community. Next slide, please. Okay, so when it's time to connect to the community, we can't just jump in and rush through it. We have to actually formulate a plan. So I believe there are 4 key points that employers need to think about when they're formulating a plan. We want to look at who are you appealing to, what's your goal or your mission going to be, what free resources are going to be available to you, and who are you going to use to develop the plan or actually execute the plan itself? Now, once we've visited and evaluated each of these topics, we can then look at the actual execution of the plan. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at each of these 4 considerations and see how we can build towards the execution of the plan itself. Next slide. Who are you appealing to? All right. This must always be your first step, because if we don't identify who our audience is, then how do we know what will make it appealing to them? How will we know what will work for them? So we want to give consideration to who are we appealing to. Now, the definition of community is a group of people living in the same place or having a common characteristic, or feeling a fellowship with others as a result of sharing common attitudes, interests, and goals. Now, recently I heard diversity being described as everybody being invited to the party, whereas inclusion is asking everyone to dance while they're there. And I really loved that approach or that description of it, because isn't that really what we're trying to do here? We're trying to take that group of people living in the same place or having those common characteristics, and we're trying to create that feeling of fellowship together, creating fellowship with others. So we're trying to actually build that community in what we do with our diversity and inclusion efforts. So then we have to evaluate who is our intended community. Are we looking at just our inner organization, our internal staff? Are we going to concentrate on external? In other words, looking at the community around you. Or are we going to do a combination of both? Now, I challenge you to understand that if you want to be a well-rounded employer, you should consider looking at the combination of both. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why I feel that way in just a moment. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties here.
That's okay. I thought maybe you couldn't hear me. There we go. Okay. What is your goal or your mission? All right. As we start to formulate our goal, it's important to step back and take a look at this. First thing we want to kind of do is do that evaluation of the status of the community. Who is your community? We just kind of talked about that, you know, on the prior slide. Is it internal or external that we're focusing on? What's the current status within your community? Is there already an existence of cohesiveness and commonality present in your community? Are there certain strengths that your community possesses that you can tap into? Or are there challenges that you must overcome along the way? Because all of these things help you determine what makes sense for the community around you. One person's community can look very different than another person's community. So this has to be custom tailored to your own community. Evaluate the world around you to know where your time and efforts need to be focused best. And all of these things feed into the very last point. How do you meet and reach people where they are? All right. The goal is not to make the focus on us. The goal is to reach all the people around us, internally and externally, where they are. Next slide, please.
Here we go again. Sorry. Bear with me for just a moment. Here we go.
Okay. Now, earlier, Bobby talked about this topic, employee attraction and retention. And, you know, as I talk with employers out there in the workplace as well, this is one of the biggest challenges that is typically expressed by employers. Most employers, they want to become an employer of choice, but how do we do that? How do we focus on becoming that employer of choice in our industry and our area and community? So take a look at the chart at the left there. I pulled some statistics from the 2017 Deloitte Volunteerism Survey, and I really found these statistics very interesting. 89% of working Americans surveyed believe that companies who sponsor volunteer activities offer a better overall working environment than those who do not. 77% said company-sponsored volunteer activities are essential to employee well-being. And that bottom statistic, 74% believe volunteerism provides an improved sense of purpose. 74%. Do you realize that means that 3 out of every 4 people believe that volunteering gives an improved sense of purpose? We, as the employers, have a job to create and bolster that feeling of a sense of purpose for our employees in the world around us. Now, there's a fourth statistic there. 70% of survey respondents go so far as to say that volunteer activities are more likely to boost employee morale than company-sponsored happy hours. I just don't know if I believe that one. Who doesn't love a good happy hour after all? But the general point that these statistics are trying to show is employees think it matters when they have volunteer opportunities to be involved. It not only helps them with a personal support and mental basis, but it helps your community around you. So this is something that we can do to actually create that positive image of unity and purpose. Now, we also, in the process, we want to make sure that we're actually exhibiting the diversity and inclusion for all people. We can't ignore the numbers. People want to feel included and be involved. It's our job, again, to help create that pathway to that end result for them. And sometimes we create challenges for ourselves without even realizing it. Take for a moment, think about the message that you portray, or sometimes that you portray without even realizing you portray it. I want you to think first of the placement of your EEOC poster in your office or your location. So all employers that are subject to the EEO regulations are required to have a poster on location. Where is your poster posted? Is it somewhere stuffed in a back room or out of the way where you've checked the box at compliance? Or is your poster actually placed somewhere within your office that your employees understand that this is something you take seriously and it matters to you, that they matter to you? And I want you to think about when you advertise job postings. Most job postings have a reference nowadays that employers are EEOC employers. What does that mean to you, and how do you treat that process? Is it, again, just a box you're checking off because it's something you have to do? Or do your hiring practices actually back it up and show that you're following what it means to be an equal employment opportunity? These are things that we actually have to all evaluate as we look at that employee attraction and retention. It's a full circle that one feeds on the other, and we have to look at all of these things as a whole in order to get to the end result of trying to create that positive image of unity and purpose within the workplace, and then taking that workplace out into the community around us. Now, we have a poll question now I'd like to throw out for everyone to kind of participate in. So, Caroline, can we pull up our poll for a moment, please? All right, I'd like y'all to tell me, how well would you rate your own company for using community involvement programs to drive employee engagement? Are you very involved, somewhat involved, pretty infrequently, or not at all? How are we doing, Caroline? Are we good to close out? Have we gotten some responses?
We have. It looks like there's still some coming in. But it looks like we're pretty good here. Good to go. There are 17% very involved, 38% are somewhat involved, 30% are pretty infrequently, and 15% are not at all.
Okay. So we have a full spectrum. We have some rock stars out there that are really getting very involved. And then we have some others that are starting at ground zero. And that's okay, because it's all about finding our place and continuing to build off of that. But the reason I wanted to go through that exercise of doing the poll evaluation is so that we can all think about where we match up currently. Because look at this that I threw in. So author Alessandra Cavalluzzi, she wrote a book called $1 Million in Change, How to Engage Your Employees, Attract Top Talent, and Make the World a Better Place. And Alessandra quotes in her book, she says, companies that are socially responsible and strong advocates of community involvement have higher levels of engagement than companies that are not actively supporting their communities. However, studies have found that fewer than 10% of mid-sized companies use their community involvement programs to actually drive engagement. Fewer than 10% of mid-sized companies. Do your employees feel like they belong? Do they feel like they can show up as they are? And are you utilizing your community involvement programs to drive that employee engagement? It's a very, very important that we all recognize that people, by being included, can feel like they are more engaged and are willing to step out there and help in these programs. We have to offer them that opportunity, though, in order to drive that engagement as well. So we hold the key to opening that lock up. Next slide, please. Now, understanding resources are always something that has to be a consideration. What types of resources are available, how much is available, and there's different things to consider here. Financial, kind of a no-brainer. Just how much money can be allocated to your initiative? How large is your company? Can we have a set budget that's allocated for this type of initiative? Or are we basically trying to beg, borrow, and steal? Finding ways to create the initiative, create those opportunities without spending a lot of capital. Obviously, right now in the world around us, we are in challenging times. So everybody is trying to be as cost conscious as possible. But there are lots of ways that we can still get involved and promote this employee engagement without spending a whole lot of money if that's the direction we need to go. Have we taken advantage of our human capital? In other words, our employees. And I threw the little logo in there about volunteers needed. That Deloitte study that I referenced before, it showed that 69% of employees are not volunteering as much as they would like to. You have 69% of your workforce out there around you that want to do more. What are you doing to bolster that for them and get them involved? Only 38% of respondents say that their employers are actually providing access to company-sponsored volunteer programs, however. So there is a huge opportunity here for us to capitalize on and be able to offer those opportunities to not only have lasting impact and make true impact in our community around us, but create a more compact and unified employee work base at the same time. Now we're looking at the other three areas: company leadership, local vendors, and organizations. And those are so important to this process that I want to actually talk about those a little bit further, as there's some very important lessons we need to keep in mind. But basically, just understand that you need to think outside the box when it comes to your resources. You may have to get a little creative to be able to find ways to implement your plan without actually breaking the bank. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so leadership of the company. Let's talk about this. And I put in all bold letters, must buy in. And I even included a caution sign here for a reason. Because your plan is basically destined to fail if your leadership does not support it. There's just no way I can emphasize that enough. You have to have your leadership on board, all in, buying in to whatever you do. Inclusion strategies exhibited by leadership, they influence the level of engagement that you're going to get or see from your actual employees. All right. Now, I included a quote there. So recently I attended a webinar that was held by the Cigna Equity and Equality Program. And one of the young ladies that was helping on this webinar, she shared a personal experience they went through at Cigna, the insurance company itself. So they had approached their leadership team and asked for an opportunity to try to promote more interaction and unity with the LGBTQ community within their company. So what they got the approval of is to basically do a lunchtime initiative, and it consisted of showing up for lunch in the cafeteria and basically putting a placard, place card, or a sign, so to speak, on the table, announcing that this was a table designated for community and communication between all employees in combination with their LGBTQ community or employees. But what happened when they rolled this initiative out is that day they put the sign on the table and a few employees and people were at the table, but the leadership team walked in and sat at the table with them. So the leadership showed up and sat at the table, and basically by showing up and sitting down at the table, they conveyed some huge messages to their entire company. They conveyed to the rest of their employees that it's okay to show up. It's okay to show up as you are.
Muted.
It's okay for you to actually join in on this initiative. It's okay because we support it. And as this young lady said, the leadership of the company supported us. They showed up and sat at the table with us to show they were all in with our initiative. And as that happened, other employees realized it was okay to join us too. It was encouraged and not discouraged. Think about the message that it conveys to your employee population by how your leadership responds to the initiatives or your plans. You have to have that buy-in. It's so crucial to your plans that you're going to initiate. You have to have that support, encouragement, and involvement from leadership down as well. I just can't say that enough. And I want you to understand it's a long-term and permanent approach. So we don't want them just to jump in for a one and done approach. We want everyone to be patient in the process and be consistent. We must have consistent involvement, encouragement too. Next slide, please. So looking at what other local resources and organizations are available, one of the things that I'm often doing in part of my normal job duties is going out and trying to locate other resources outside of the box that may help whoever I'm working with. And so I envision your plan of having to do the same. There's a lot of different resources and organizations around your area that you may not even think about on a day-to-day basis, but as you start to seek them out, you're going to find these opportunities. Do you have a local chamber of commerce that might have options and opportunities for you? Are you a member of SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Managers, or is there someone within your office who is? How about your insurance carriers and brokers? You know, a lot of times we're employers too, so we have to initiate these things within our own offices and create these own initiatives and opportunities ourselves. And so a lot of times what you see is as these opportunities present themselves, suddenly it's something that now is coming into an additional resource being made available to all of the clients too. So reach out to see if your insurance carriers and brokers have things available to you to share. Your regulatory organizations. Now, right here, a lot of you are going, whoa, we don't talk to regulatory organizations because they're always dropping the hammer on employers. But recognize that that's not always the case. And if you actually take a look at the websites that they have or reach out to them, there are many times that they have between the EEOC and the Department of Labor, there are different white papers and guides and templates and things that might be available to you to give you additional insight and information to help move your plan along as you go through. So regulatory organizations are not always a negative thing. We can use some of that guidance and the regulatory information to create a positive impact to our program. And then we also here in South Carolina, we have the South Carolina Race Equity and Inclusion Partnership, but looking at them, they're one of like a community program that's available. So they created a comprehensive guide for improving race equity and inclusion in the workplace. And we've actually provided for all of you the link to that actual program or that comprehensive guide within our white paper that's being shared. But what community programs do you have available? There's always things changing and becoming available. I just saw last night an article releasing that LinkedIn just rolled out 11 free courses to provide strategies for making the workplace diverse and inclusive. So look for those opportunities, keep your eyes out. They're everywhere around us right now as well. We just may have to go seeking them. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Just remember, it takes the time to seek them out, but these programs and resources may already be developed and available to you. Just tap into what's already there. You may not even need to use a ton of financial resources for them. Some may be free, others may have a fee though. Next slide. You also need to look at who's going to develop and execute your plan, and who you have involved may be dependent on what your end goal is. We definitely, again, it's a must to have your company leadership and upper management. I also, in my opinion, I believe you must give the HR representation in your company a seat at the table. They're the ones who are going to champion this program and get it off the ground for you. They can incorporate the legal aspects you need to consider as well. You can also form committees within your employee base and maybe even look at having some employee ambassadors who are people within your organization who are going to help be the coordinators and take the lead with hands-on. And then, of course, look around you for community leaders, business people, chamber of commerce, organizations you're involved with. All those things matter. Next slide, please. All right, so Denzel Washington recently addressed a group of graduating college students, and he made the statement, just because you're doing a lot more does not mean you're getting more done. And that's the approach we want to take, that as we look at initiating our plan and connecting to our community, we want to always approach it in a very conscientious manner. We want you to be purposeful. We want to be methodical about our approach. We want to always focus on the end result. We're going to use building blocks to get there, but it's a stepping stone, one step at a time. We're going to engage each other along the way, or we should, and always be open and genuine, and always, always, always stay unified in the process. Remember that the goal here is to make sure everyone knows they matter within your organization. People just want to feel supported, appreciated, and safe for who they are, not what they are. So we hope we've shared some ideas and insight for you to help go out and promote the best you are as an organization within your own company and the community around you. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Caroline with that.
Unmuted.
Thank you, everybody. This has been just so much great information. I really appreciate you being here today. And it doesn't look like we have any questions that are coming in. So I think,
Caroline, if you could keep it open for a moment, and I know we're at the top of the hour, but we would be happy if somebody does post questions that we will follow up with a FAQ early next week. So if we could keep that open for just a moment, that would be great.
Absolutely. And to submit any of your questions, you can do so in the chat feature. And like Bobby said, we'll get those answered and out to you next week. I will leave this open for a little while in case anybody wants to type in a question. But I also want to thank everybody for being here today, and we can go ahead and close this out. And like I said, I'll just leave this open for a few more minutes. Thank you, everybody, and thanks for attending today. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Appreciate everybody.